Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. For the rest of this month, I'm going to be doing mix-up stories. Could be demons, could be Bigfoot. Varies from story to story. And happy Halloween. Let's get into it. Before I begin my first story, I'd like to apologize for the cat that keeps meowing in the background. Still working on getting a home of my own, but my computer is in one of my brother's house, and the cat will not stop meowing. Let's get into it. Story 1. Shadow Person. Now, I consider myself a sane person. What I'm about to tell you is the God's honest truth that just happened to me around 1:44 a.m. that is going to keep me up for the rest of the night. I was lying in bed just looking straight across the room when all of a sudden I heard the wind pick up. I swear to God, I felt a strong breeze. I got freezing cold, then it went black. I became petrified. I felt a feeling that I can't explain, a presence. It felt as though someone was sitting on top of me, resting on my stomach. I was able to think clearly and knew what was going on. I didn't panic because I felt that this thing didn't want to hurt me. It seemed gentle but made me uncomfortable, and I asked it to leave. It did. That's when I realized why I couldn't see, because it was right in my face. And as it jumped up and left, I could see a completely black shadow just vanish into thin air above me. As soon as I was able to move, I jumped out of bed, turned on the light, and prayed. I checked the thermostat and tried to make sense of the situation, but I couldn't. The thermostat read 80 degrees. The more I think about it, the more it freaks me out. All I know is that it happened and it wasn't a dream. I've had nightmares, but they never made me feel uneasy to go back to sleep. I wish it were a dream. Story 2. Bigfoot. I have a story to share with you about 1993, when I was a teenager and before everybody had a cell phone in their hand. I used to live at a place about 13 miles outside Meridian, Mississippi. There is nothing there but hunting and fishing, a managed stream, a lot of creeks, rivers, ponds, small lakes, woods, and old logging roads that went on for miles. Some relatives of mine owned a great deal of land close to where I lived, and on their land was an old logging road that went to a creek called Tallahatta. It is a long and winding creek. This creek in some places is as wide as most rivers, but it's always shallow until it rains. And on my family's property close to this creek they had built a simple one-room cabin for camping. It was built high on 5-foot telephone poles, for when the creek floods, it would be above water. I had camped there many times, but one fall night when I was camping there, the last time I camped there, I went with some friends. There were 4 of us. We had been wade fishing all day and we had planned to stay there for the night. So we fished till dark and went back to the cabin. We made a simple fire and hung out a while, drank some whiskey we had borrowed, and cleaned lots of fish. We did that until about 11 p.m., and then all went into the cabin for the night, lit up a couple of Coleman lanterns and got a good fire going in the wood heater, and we laid down for the night. The next thing I knew, I woke up to some noise in the cabin, and I looked while rubbing my eyes to see one of my friends almost jogging through the cabin from the door to his bed. And I guess I was the last to wake up. I asked, "What are y'all doing?" They said all at once, "There's something out there." I rolled my eyes, turned away, and laid back down, and I said, "There's nothing out there, go back to sleep." Just as I finished saying it, I heard the noise. It sounded like limbs breaking in a short distance, and one of my friends yelled, "What the hell is that?" Another replied he didn't know. So let's just say I was awake now. I got up and tried to listen better, and I could hear it. When I put my ear to the wall, I could hear what sounded like something hitting trees and walking heavily through the woods next to us. I started to think what that could be. I knew it wasn't a buck. Rutting season is later in the year, and there are black bears here, but I never heard any commotion like this. Plus, it sounded like it was growling. Well, I was freaked out now. My friends and I grew up hunting and fishing and camping in the woods, and are very experienced in the sights and sounds of the woods and its animals, but I was not familiar with this type of sound and behavior. As I listened, I could hear it pacing back and forth through the woods next to us, and it seemed to be breaking limbs. At one point, it made a loud noise like a growl, and then a large limb break. I stepped back from the wall and said, "What are we going to do?" One of my friends asked what we should do. "What do you mean?" I said. "If whatever it was tries to get in here." A silence came over all of us, and we were all thinking the same thing. protection. We scrambled to find what we had. I had a .38 snub-nosed pistol and 5 shells that I always take camping. We had a few knives and a machete and some long logs from the small wood pile inside. So I focused on getting some clothes and boots on, as did everyone else, and all the while the noise had not stopped, and as we were spreading out in the cabin it stopped. One of my friends thought it was gone. We listened and I thought to myself, what if it's not in the woods anymore? What if it's closer? One of my friends went to the door that had the only small diamond-shaped window to look out to the steps outside, and I yelled, "Don't open the door." He yelled back that he was just going to have a look. He looked through the window for a while and asked for a flashlight. So we took him one and he shined it outside for a while and didn't see anything. So he asked, "Do y'all want to make a run for the four-wheelers?" And I was trying to think how far they were, about 30 yards from the trail to the logging road. I thought that it was a very long walk, especially if that thing is still out there. We listened for a little longer, all of us still on edge. Then one of my friends asked, "What is it? A pissed off bear, you think?" Another friend replied, "I don't know, but I can't stand this. We gotta see what it is." I told them I was staying put. I'm waiting for daylight so I can see. 2 flashlights, 2 lanterns, and 1 little gun isn't enough for me. So everyone agreed and sat back down and waited while one friend stayed looking out the door. It had been 10 or 15 minutes since we'd heard any noise. Then all of a sudden a big thud on the back side of the cabin, halfway up the wall. We all scrambled to the center and we yelled and cussed, and we were yelling at whatever it was to go away. So at this point I was pissed. I thought somebody is messing with us. So I ran to the wall where I heard the thud, and I banged back on it as hard as I could and yelled, "I've got a gun in here and I will shoot you." Everyone went quiet to see if we got a response, but we heard nothing. So I put my ear to the wall to see what I could hear. What I heard still freaks me out today. It sounded like heavy breathing about waist down from me, and what sounded like a hand rubbing against the outside wall, like it was trying to find a way in. I stepped back and looked at the wall. It was head level where I heard what sounded like a hand rubbing the wall. If you were standing outside, would be almost 12 feet from the ground. As I was thinking about this, one of my friends said, "Did you hear anything?" But I said no. They knew I did. So I said we might need to make a run for it. To the four-wheelers, I mean. We walked to the door and got ready. One of my friends said, "When I open this door, don't stop. Just run and crank them up. It don't matter who's driving, just whoever gets there first." And then I said, "Let me shoot a couple of times in the air as we run out." 2 of them said okay, and the other friend said, "Why is that thing close?" I didn't want to say, but I said yes, and at that moment my friend opened the door. I ran out and shot twice as I ran down the steps, and then I noticed I must have been running slow because I was getting passed up by my friends. So I sped up, and we were at the four-wheelers. They cranked up and we were gone. We had them wide open all the way home. I felt like something was going to snatch me off the back of that thing, so I stayed turned around so I could see behind us. But I didn't see anything. It felt like it took us forever to get back to my house. But at 50 miles per hour, it was probably only 15 minutes until we got to my house at almost 3 in the morning, and I banged on the door until my dad got up. And he was mad as he asked, "I thought you guys were camping." He asked what happened, and I said, "We just wanted to come back here is all." He said, "Where's my cooler and stuff you took?" I said, "Back at the cabin, we'll get it tomorrow." I never saw him so mad that we just left everything there, but he could see I was upset, so he left me alone and went back to bed. Needless to say, we did not sleep. We just talked about what it could have been and what was it doing. As we talked and fussed about it, our courage was building as daylight approached. So we waited to about 8 a.m. and loaded up some shotguns and rifles, and we went back ready for whatever we might have to face. When we got there, everything was in order. As they went inside, I went to the back of the cabin and looked up at the wall where I heard the breathing. It was about 8 feet, and where I heard the hand rubbing the wall had to be 12 feet. I looked all over the ground. There were no tracks of any kind. The ground was hard. But as we searched the woods around the cabin, we did find limbs broke and pulled down from all different heights. Highest was 9 feet up, and the lowest was about 4 feet. No hairs, no smells, just broke limbs. We looked for hours, then we gathered our things and went back home, and we didn't talk about it because we knew people would laugh and make fun of us. So I didn't talk about it again for years. It makes a great camping story, of course. People think you're pulling their leg or messing with them. I just laugh along. But I did go camping again a year or more later, just not there. I went back to the cabin a few times to go fishing and arrowhead hunting in the water, but always during the day. I'm not scared of the woods I grew up around, but I do fear what might be in them. So what do you believe it was? I don't know. I didn't see it, so I try not to think about it, what it could have been. I just know don't take my surroundings lightly. And if there is such thing as a bigfoot or whatever it was out there, I'm sure as a wild beast or an animal, it does not want to be messed with, and that it can be hostile like a bear can be. So be careful. Story 3. Imposter. This experience happened to me back in the early 90s. I'd been dating a girl that had at one time been involved in witchcraft, and at the time I was living alone in an apartment. The apartment had hardwood floors throughout, so you could definitely hear if someone else was walking in another room. I always had an eerie feeling like I was being watched, but would dismiss it as much as possible. One night I went to bed as usual, having set my alarm clock for 6 a.m. in order to get up for work. The alarm clock was facing the bed, so I could see it at all times. A noise brought me out of a deep sleep and into a semi-conscious state, enough for me to see the clock and know what time it was. It was exactly 1:01, and I remember thinking to myself, great, I have 5 more hours of sleep. I always sleep on my side in the fetal position, and on this occasion my left hand was hanging off the bed. At that instant, I hear footsteps coming through the house, sounding like my girlfriend's boots she always wore, getting closer and closer. Then whatever it was started speaking to me in her voice, trying to convince me that it was her. I remember trying to move, but I was completely paralyzed and could not. I spoke back saying, "No, you're not." It kept on until it finally reached my bed, speaking sweetly in her voice. My bedroom door was closed, so it had come right through the door. I could see the clock, keep in mind, but I could not see my uninvited guest. There was a brief moment of silence. Then I started feeling the bed move behind me, and I said one more time, "You're not Kelly." At that instant, I felt hot breath on my ear, and the voice changed from her voice into a man's and said, "How did you know?" That's when I finally snapped out of it and jumped out of bed, nearly pissing myself, and ran over to the light switch and turned it on, along with every other light in the house. There wasn't anything there. It had come and gone in a minute, but what had seemed an eternity. Like I said, the whole time I was desperately trying to move, but was frozen in terror. Some people would simply say that it was just a dream, but I'm here to tell you that it was definitely not. Needless to say, shortly thereafter I stopped seeing her. A few years later, I had another experience that I will share another time. Before I move on to the next story, I would like to point out that a majority of my viewers aren't subscribed. If you can just take a moment and hit that subscribe button, maybe click like or leave a comment, it'll go a long way in helping me fight the algorithm. You can always take it back later, and it's totally free. Now, back to the stories. Story 4. Skinwalker. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside they heard noises, as if someone moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew that they should take action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the lights and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran toward the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking its head out to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed over the gun and placed the ash-covered bullet in the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt's side and my uncle's, and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared, that he knew it was her, and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know the skinwalker name and you say their name, it will kill them. Story 5. Demon. When I was 17 years old, I was attacked by an evil spirit, or some call them demons. Me and my family lived in a 3-bedroom home in Danville, Illinois. One day, when I got home around 5:30 p.m. from work, my mom was still cooking dinner and I walked up to her saying hi and looked at what she was cooking. I gave her a kiss and then went to my room to listen to some music because dinner wasn't ready. I laid down on my bed and put on my headphones. I heard the DJ talking and he put on the Beatles. As soon as the song took off, all was fine. The song was on like I've heard it before, but this time something went all wrong. As I heard the song, a person spoke to me. He said, "Satan, Satan, Satan." I also heard like crickets in the background, and I could still hear the song, but faintly. As soon as I heard that, I said no 3 times out loud. I went to get up. As I sat up on the bed, a hand grabbed me and pushed me down. That thing was strangling me. I could feel his fingers on me. I also felt his legs and him sitting on my waist. I grabbed his arm, but couldn't see anything, just a hole between my hands. It felt like an arm that had warts on it. My room got cold, like 30 below zero, and smelled of sulfur. I tried to get him off me, but I couldn't. When I knew that evil spirit would kill me, I tried to pray but couldn't say a word, because he was squeezing. That's when I said in my mind, "God have mercy on me, I'll change, I'll be good." And as soon as I said that, it was gone. If I had not called on God's help, I think I would have died that day. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.